When the sheriff's boat pulled up to my private dock that morning, I thought maybe they'd finally caught whoever had been leaving those ridiculous bottles on my property. The deputy looked half apologetic, half embarrassed as he climbed onto my dock. "Mr. Bremer," he said, clearing his throat, "we've got a report that your yacht's been illegally moored on HOA property." I had to blink twice to process what he'd just said. "You mean my dock on my land with my yacht?" The deputy sighed deeply. "Apparently, Karen on the peninsula says she's invoking waterway jurisdiction." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Tell Karen I'm about to invoke courtroom annihilation." My name is Tyson Bremer, and at 42 years old, I'd finally achieved what I'd been working toward for 2 decades. After years as a software architect, dealing with endless meetings and corporate bureaucracy, I'd saved enough to buy my dream property on Cattail Sound, a marshy stretch of coastal land just outside the town of Pelican Cove. 3 acres of peace, a modest bungalow where I could work remotely when needed, and my pride and joy, the digital detox, a 42-foot yacht I kept docked right behind my home. It was supposed to be my escape from the madness of modern life. What I hadn't counted on was Tricia Lormont, though everyone called her Karen behind her back for obvious reasons. She was the HOA president of Bayside Dunes, the gated waterfront community across the inlet from my property. With a bob haircut that looked sharp enough to cut glass and an obsession with laminated bylaws that bordered on religious fervor, Karen saw herself as the supreme authority of the entire sound. The problem was, my property wasn't in her HOA. It wasn't in any HOA. I'd specifically chosen it for that reason. But that didn't stop her from referring to my home as the aesthetic liability across the water in her community newsletters. The harassment started small, almost comically so. Karen had her teenage kids canoe over to my dock and leave glass bottles containing HOA guidelines and suggestions for property improvement. The first one I found floating against my dock pylons contained a 12-page document about appropriate nautical colors for watercraft. Apparently, the navy blue of my yacht was aggressively masculine and disrupted the coastal serenity palette she'd established for Bayside Dunes. I kept the bottles as evidence and ignored the contents. When I didn't respond to her bottled messages, she escalated to sending formal cease and desist letters on official Bayside Dunes letterhead. These warned me that my yacht, and I quote, obstructed the community's visual harmony and violated the sanctity of our shared waterscape. The letters came certified mail, which meant she was spending HOA funds to harass someone who wasn't even a member. My favorite was when I installed solar-powered string lights along my dock for safety at night. Within 48 hours, I received a citation for unlicensed illumination that supposedly violated the Bayside Marine Ambience Code. The situation became surreal when I found an actual notice of dock seizure chained to one of my pylons with a heavy-duty bike lock. Karen had apparently declared my dock a navigational hazard, and claimed the Bayside Dunes HOA was asserting emergency jurisdiction over it. The notice was printed on thick cardstock with an embossed HOA seal, as if that somehow gave it legal weight. I had to use bolt cutters to remove it, and I made sure to photograph everything, including the damage the chain had done to my pylon. Things reached a boiling point when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Drunk on what she perceived as her maritime authority, she actually hired a private towing company to relocate my yacht. I still remember that Thursday morning vividly. I was having coffee on my deck when I heard the rumble of a large diesel engine. A commercial towboat was approaching my dock, with 2 men preparing chains and hooks. What they hadn't counted on was my security system, which included a drone with live streaming capability. The drone launched automatically when it detected unauthorized approach to the dock, broadcasting everything directly to my phone and, more importantly, to my lawyer Maya Bronson's office. Maya was what you might call a legal shark who specialized in property rights and jurisdictional overreach cases. She lived for this kind of thing. Before the towboat captain could even drop anchor properly, Maya had already filed for an emergency injunction and was on a conference call with the sheriff's department. The tow operators retreated quickly when the sheriff's boat arrived, but the damage to Karen's credibility was already done. The courtroom showdown came 3 weeks later, and it was everything I'd hoped for. Judge Fenwick, a 70-year-old former Navy man who'd been sailing these waters since before Bayside Dunes even existed, presided over the case. Karen showed up in what looked like her interpretation of nautical formal wear, complete with an anchor brooch and navy blazer with gold buttons. She'd brought a PowerPoint presentation and a binder thick enough to use as a boat anchor. When Karen stood to present her case, she spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in an HOA meeting. She cited community waterway aura infringement and unified shoreline philosophy as legal precedents. She actually used the phrase maritime aesthetic sovereignty with a straight face. Judge Fenwick let her go on for about 10 minutes before raising his hand to stop her. "Ma'am," he said slowly, as if speaking to a child, "that man's dock is on a separate tax parcel. You have no jurisdiction over his property whatsoever." Karen's face went through several shades of red as she stammered about greater good and community standards transcending property lines. That's when Judge Fenwick's patience ran out entirely. He banged his gavel once, hard, and said in a voice that carried throughout the courtroom, "This is America, not Atlantis. Your HOA rules stop at your property line. Case dismissed." But he wasn't done. My counterclaim for harassment, attempted theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress was not only allowed to proceed but fast-tracked given the egregious nature of Karen's actions. The real fireworks came when Maya presented our evidence. The bottles, the fake legal notices, the attempted yacht theft, and most damaging of all, the HOA financial records showing Karen had used over $15,000 in association funds for her personal vendetta against me. Several Bayside Dunes board members were in the courtroom, and I watched their faces go pale as Maya detailed each expenditure. Karen had listed the expenses as waterway beautification initiatives in the HOA budget. Maya then played the drone footage of the attempted towing, which clearly showed the tow operators preparing to damage my yacht's hull with improper equipment. She presented estimates showing the potential damage would have exceeded $100,000. The judge's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. When Maya finished, he turned to Karen and asked if she had any actual legal basis for her actions. Her response about implied maritime commons was met with visible frustration from the bench. The judgment was swift and brutal. Karen was ordered to pay $35,000 in damages, covering my legal fees, the damage to my dock, and compensation for harassment. She was also sentenced to 100 hours of community service specifically focused on property law education, and required to attend a 2-day seminar titled Property Lines. They're Not Just Suggestions. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of my property by land or water. But the best part came when Judge Fenwick addressed the Bayside Dunes HOA directly. He ordered them to install signs at all their waterfront areas stating, "Objects across the inlet are not under your control," and to send a written apology to me from the board. He also mandated that any future HOA presidents must complete a course on jurisdictional limits before taking office. The entire HOA was put on notice that any further harassment would result in criminal charges. The aftermath was swift and merciless for Karen. The Bayside Dunes board held an emergency meeting that very evening. By unanimous vote, she was immediately removed from her position as HOA president and banned from holding any board position for life. They also filed a civil suit against her personally to recover the misappropriated funds. Word spread quickly through Pelican Cove about the yacht incident, as it became known. Karen's real estate business, which had relied heavily on her HOA connections, lost most of its clients within a month. Her husband, a quiet man who'd always seemed embarrassed by her antics, filed for divorce 2 weeks after the trial, citing irreconcilable differences and financial recklessness. Even her own mother, who attended the trial, was overheard telling someone that she'd warned Karen for years about her control issues. The criminal charges were the final nail in the coffin. The district attorney, after reviewing the case, charged Karen with attempted grand theft, fraud, and misuse of fiduciary funds. She was ultimately convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 2 years probation, 300 hours of additional community service, and $50,000 in fines. When the sentence was read, Karen's perfectly composed facade finally cracked completely, and she sobbed openly in the courtroom, muttering something about just trying to maintain standards as the bailiff led her away.